yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Ed Riskin. I'm the Director of Public Works in the unlikely role of MC for this kind of high-tech event, DPW.
That's unlikely. Director of Public Works, talking about open source and data. That's about as unlikely as you possibly can get.
Right, we don't often get to be involved with this kind of fun, cool, sexy stuff. We're building buildings and filling potholes and picking up garbage on the street, but I think even we are recognizing the power of what we're talking about here today. And so basically why we're here, you know, what we all learned in high school civics class is that, you know, governments are made for the people and by the people and of the people. And if it weren't for the people out there that we're serving, we wouldn't be here. There'd be no need for us. We wouldn't have this nice building to be in. Taking that a step further, all this data that we use to run the government, this data is not our data. This data is for the public. It's for the people. The systems that we use are not our systems. They're the public systems. They're for the people. And while government data maybe isn't sexy, it can very much be empowering. And by making data available, by using open systems, we're really supporting transparency, accountability, and ultimately progress of the government. And so it is something that's important, and we're here today kind of in recognition of that, and to try to bring more of us into the fold of understanding how powerful this can be and what our responsibilities are as a leadership of government to make this data available, and how we can benefit from using kind of much more open systems and architecture. And I'd say from what I've seen around the country, there's not a whole lot of people around the country who get this, particularly in leadership roles, but we're very lucky here that our mayor does. As most of you know, Mayor Newsom has been an early adopter of technology, and he's been an early supporter, if not a mandator, of using data and technology to help us manage the government better. He's been pushing us all in this direction by bringing kind of Web 2.0 to the city. He's helped us to better connect with our various constituencies and residents and businesses and other stakeholders. And now by bringing Data SF to government, he's really pushing us the next leap forward. And it is a pretty big leap for a lot of us, and maybe pulling some of us out of our comfort zone. But it's, I think you'll hear from some of the folks talking today why this is so powerful and important. So I want to thank the mayor for his leadership on this, pushing us forward. And without further ado, our mayor, Gavin Newsom.
Thanks, Ed. And thank you for your leadership and stewardship of this process. We've got a special guest here, Tim OReilly, who's going to walk through what this is, because I imagine some of you are sitting here saying, what are we even talking about, and why am I here, and why was I forced to be here by my department head, because I don't see many department heads here. So those of you that took the time to be here, I'm very grateful, and I assure you at my next department head meeting I will call out those that didn't take the time to be here, so don't you worry. I'll take care of your bosses. That being said, it goes to, I think, some initial reticence about this whole effort and concern, because this is transformational. This is real. This is not insignificant from my perspective. This is not just incidental. This is fundamental, as Ed was saying. And I think he did a great job making a foundational argument about who we work for, what our real job description is and should be about, and the opportunity now to do our jobs a little bit differently and act more as a conduit as opposed to sort of a distributor of information and ideas. And I think there's an important distinction between the two. We have got to unleash the creative talent, not just inside of all of us physically here and within all of our city departments, but within the city and county of San Francisco, the region, the state, and the nation. By giving people information, you empower them. And with that information and that empowerment comes innovation and new ideas at a scale and scope and a speed that puts everything we're doing in perspective. We do not necessarily operate as quickly and efficiently as we should, and I would argue we could. In so many ways, we're still running a government that we were running 150 years ago. We take data, we distill what we think is important, and then we communicate that data to the public. We have a framework in San Francisco where we're constantly fighting folks that want more data, more transparency so that they can offer more accountability, but it always tends to be focused on gotcha. I got that email proving this person talked to this person with this intention to do this, which was inappropriate based upon the Board of Supervisors not adopting a strategy that advanced a principle based on a hearing that had to be noticed under the Brown Act pursuant to Section 13.4. Okay, fine. Important, we got you. We have a higher bar in terms of that transparency and sunshine of any city in America. But it's trivial substantively to real people. What's meaningful is that somehow my life is going to improve dramatically. That's what people want out of their government. How can we support and how can we create conditions to allow people to live their lives out loud and more fully and more engagingly? And that's the principle behind what we're offering and arguing for today and what this executive order represents. We've had a few departments, DPW being one of them. We have the police department being another. MTA has provided information. I don't know who else I'm missing. DBI has been great on this. So a number of you, thank you, have participated in this sort of piloted phase. And we've created what we call 100 data sets. And we basically took information and we put it in a way that, as sort of simply described, sort of machine readable, and then open it up. And all of these very creative types, young, but not necessarily time of life, state of mind, meaning young and old, but with a youthful sort of exposure to the world, have already taken that information and they've adopted, if you look on that screen, within days, not months, not years, not through procurement, not through cost appropriations, not through all this. They've already adopted different ways for us to use data that had already existed. And they've put them in terms of, they've created applications. We put it as an app store. This was Tim's idea. You can now go and you can literally get on your iPhone and you can get these applications to find out where you need to recycle and promote recycling. You find information if you move into the city and you want to learn more about crime. You can find crime maps that are more readily accessible and easier to navigate and understand. You can find out 311. This is something that probably taken us, I don't want to belittle our efforts, but it probably taken us 2 years, a couple $1 million to do what someone did in a nanosecond by determining for us, by just providing simple information at 301. They basically took that information on a block-by-block basis. You can get all the information in your zip code of what everybody, all your friends and neighbors are doing in terms of calling for service. They did that within a couple weeks once we announced this. But what we've basically done is so modest. We've done 100 of these data sets, but limited to these departments. Imagine if the rest of you unveiled all your information. I get it, confidential aside. I'm not arguing to be foolhardy here. But all that other information, you just threw it out there. It's not, as Ed said, it's not ours. It's the public's. It's the taxpayers. And get it out there and see what people can do with it. And it's limitless what they're capable of doing. This is government 2.0, but even that's kind of getting a little stale, 2.0. Though Tim is having a conference, Web Summit 2.0, and I know that he finds that dimensionality very exciting and enlivening. But government needs to be on the cutting edge here. Few other cities are doing this. They're invariably all going to be doing this. I think this is the beginning of a transformational time in terms of the way we govern and the way ultimately we empower our shareholders, the people that really matter most, and that's the citizens, to demand a more responsive and organized government system that has meaning so that they don't have to waste their time coming down with stickers and act like their only approach to government is showing up at a Board of Supervisors hearing, that somehow they're going to get their voice heard, that they can truly design from home what government should look like and how it should operate. I'll leave Tim to describe, as he does brilliantly, the vending machine analogy or metaphor, which is incredibly important, and he'll describe that in a moment because I think it does distill the essence of what we're trying to argue for. So long-windedly, without being technical, this is simply about you taking information and bringing it to the public and doing it in a way that is relevant in the context of all these people that mash up this information and can make it meaningful and useful. It requires some confidence on your part because this exposes warts and all, the good and the bad. So there's certainly a reticence. I get that. You got enough problems, right, with the information that already comes out. You don't necessarily want all that information out, but this makes us better, and I think makes us more efficient, makes us certainly more accountable, and I argue certainly more responsible, saves the taxpayers money, and is the ultimate in terms of inclusive government and democratizing information, not just the framework of an election. So that's the spirit. The executive order is self-explanatory. We're going to hold you accountable to do this. This is important. DT, half of them hate this, truly hate it. They've been undermining this. Half of them are spectacular. I won't mention which. But I appreciate Chris Veen being willing to work with me on this. But some of his staff's not necessarily so convinced. But those that are here must be. So we thank them for being here. Open source, open data, open government. Open source procurement, open source is the spirit of our times. And that's the spirit that brings us here. And that's the spirit to wit. We will hear from Tim, and we will also hear from Phil Ting, who gets this, who has some of the most important information of all our departments. And I'm pleased that you took the time to be here and are supporting this effort and cause as well.
All right, thanks. Hi, I'm Tim OReilly. I'm a publisher of computer books originally and a conference producer in the technology space. I've been around the technology industry for a couple of decades, and I've had a pretty big hand in cheerleading some revolutions. From the original commercialization of the internet in the early 90s through the open source software revolution in the late 90s and what we started calling Web 2.0 back in 2004. And I want to put what's happening now with what a lot of people are calling Government 2.0 in a technology perspective. Now, you guys probably remember back when the first wave of the internet hit government, and all of a sudden it became an imperative to put up a website. And that was a new level of accessibility. People didn't have to come down to City Hall or to the Department of Motor Vehicles. They could actually go online and start to do things. And that took a while to take hold. Those were the first movements in the early 90s. And now, of course, it's taken for granted that you have to have a website. But something happened in the technology world starting in the late 90s, that it wasn't enough to have a website. That was sort of Web 1.0, if you like. What we started to see was the emergence of the internet as a kind of platform for applications, in the same way that a PC is a platform for applications. You don't buy a PC so that you can sit there and stare at the screen. You buy a PC so that you can run a spreadsheet or edit a document. Similarly, people were going on the internet so they could shop on Amazon, so they could search for information. And sites like Amazon and Google, so on, are applications. And these are, if you like, cloud-based applications living on the internet. And this evolution has continued, where the internet has become a more and more integral part of all of our lives. We get most of our information from it. But there's something curious about the way the internet developed. In the early days, it was, say, some big companies publishing out their data for everybody to see. But what we saw evolve was more and more a participatory internet, where anyone might, say, post a blog, and it would get noticed by other people, and the word would get passed around, and before long that would be the top of the headlines on Google News. So we have this participatory web that started happening. Well, this started to hit government originally with a few, advocates who were trying to make government more transparent in the way that Mayor Newsom was discussing. Let's make sure that the watchdogs have a better view on government. But what also started to happen was that people realized that these new tools of information dissemination, of reporting, of social media could be used for other purposes. And one person who realized this very powerfully is now our president, Barack Obama. With myBarackObama.com, he built a platform for citizens to hold their own fundraisers, to do their own organizing. And, of course, everybody then said, whoa, there's something happening here. We've got to become part of this. He came into office. He started talking about opening up government. He embraced this idea that the internet somehow could change the way that government does business. So a lot of us in the technology community started engaging with the Obama administration and saying, well, what is it that we really need to frame if we want people to understand what it means to do this new technology-enabled government? Is it really just about the kind of watchdog transparency? No, it's not that. Is it about social media? And for example, having a YouTube channel or a Twitter feed? No, that's not enough. And so the more I talked to people, the more I came to realize that the fundamental lesson that we could take from both the success of big technology companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft, but also from the early successes in Government 2.0, that there was a new way of acting like a platform provider. Now, what does that mean? When I first started saying that to government people, I thought they're not going to get it. But there's an analogy that started to make a lot of sense. And this has to do with thinking about procurement. When you build IT systems in government, you typically go out there, you specify them, you figure out exactly what services you want to offer. You maybe work with, you put it out for bid and you pick a few partners who build these applications. Maybe some of them you build internally. And here it is, the perfect suite of government applications. Except it's maybe not so perfect because there's all kinds of things that you didn't think of. Well, this is an analogy that's probably familiar to all of you. You have a cell phone and it did a certain number of things and was okay. But then along came Apple with a different model. And that model was that they turned the iPhone into a platform for software developers where anybody could add applications to the phone. It wasn't wide open. Apple still approves them or not. But they started to think of the phone as a platform. Suddenly now there are 80,000 applications on the iPhone, all kinds of things that you would never dream of. And all that Apple had to do was to put together the features that let independent developers exercise their imagination, their creativity to develop new services. And that's really the heart of what the opportunity is for government as well. Because it turns out that all of these interesting new services on the internet are not just software, they're really based on data. Google is a data service. Amazon is a data service. Twitter is a data service. And so is datasf.org. That is, the city has data which may be coming from the activities of government workers. It may be coming from data collected from citizens. And the question is, can that be made more useful to citizens? And in particular, though, do you have to figure out in advance what all of those applications might be? How many of you here have an iPhone or played with it? Okay, so you need more of you need to get one because you'll realize just how remarkable it is, how many applications there are, how useful they are, how interesting. And what we've already seen up there on the screen right now, Routesy is a San Francisco data application. Just figure, where are the buses? How do I get from here to there? When are they arriving? All of this is information that maybe you might have even had it on a website somewhere, right? But how much easier is it to be on a cell phone and be able to get that information? Well, the question is, do you have to build all those applications, or can outside developers build them? And so part of what Open Data does is it creates the opportunity for others to build on the data that the city holds from its activities. And Mayor Newsom referred to the vending machine analogy, and I got this from a book called The Next Government of the United States by a guy named Donald Kettle. And he was really talking about how for many of its functions, government acts a lot like a vending machine. Citizens pay their taxes and they expect to get out schools and roads and police and fire services and sewer services. And our idea of citizen participation, that we see in a lot of discussions is they get to shake the vending machine. They get to come to a hearing, they get to protest, they get to let us know what they think. And that's not a broad enough vision of what we're trying to accomplish. What we're actually trying to accomplish is to increase the variety of the goods that come out of the vending machine. What government can do as it starts to think like a platform provider, to think about government in the way that Apple thought about the phone market. What you can start to do is to create services that actually allow the citizens themselves to add value to what you do. That's the heart of what I call Web 2.0 and the revolution that happened in the later stages of the World Wide Web. It was that companies learned how to let their users add value to their products. Twitter doesn't create all those tweets. Facebook doesn't create all those status updates. The users do. Google doesn't create all the content that it indexes. The users do. So this is a new model on the internet, and it's a new model now that has to come to government. It's one in which you provide the tools, the platform, and you provide enough of a plausible promise in the applications you build. And then developers from outside can come in and take that open data and start to build it. I think you'll go, if you want to look at an example of a really functioning app store, the city of Washington, D.C., where some of this was really pioneered, has a site called apps.dc.gov. And it's really interesting because on the one side of their app store, you'll see a set of applications that were developed by the city itself. And then you'll see in a second column, these are city applications that were developed by citizens using government data. And the citizens will often develop applications that are more specific, have unexpected purposes that you might not have thought of, or that you might have not have gotten on your priority list. That's the problem, of course, with if you have to do it all yourself, that means that some things fall off the bottom of the list. Whereas if you start with the idea that what you're building is a platform that others can add to, some of those features that you didn't know were going to be important will be built by someone else. So you're not alone. I think every city in America is exploring this. There are organizations that are helping cities to share ideas and code. In fact, Jen Palka over there is associated with one called Code for America. The ideas that you're exploring in San Francisco will be useful in other cities. The ideas that other cities are exploring will be useful to you. So I really encourage you to get out there, network with your peers in other locations, look at the best practices, look at the ideas. But above all, it's really all here. This Open Data Directive is not just about putting the data up, as Mayor Newsom said, so that people can look over your shoulder. It's putting the data up so that people can do useful things with it. And when you make data available in open, machine-readable formats, developers, software developers, are able to engage with it to develop new applications for citizens that make your work more useful. They amplify the power of what you yourselves do. They give you leverage. And of course, it's not just a technical problem. It is also the legal framework for reuse, and that's a lot of what I think you have here. The city is saying, yes, go to town. This data is open. It's available. It's for the use of the citizens. It's held in trust for the citizens. And with that, I think we really have an opportunity to remake the way that government interacts with its citizens, and to really put it on the cutting edge of what's happening, not just with the web, but with mobile devices and all the different kinds of touch points that make it easier for citizens to have access to government services, to know what those services are, to be able to give you feedback, whether it's something like 311 reporting or to acquire services. And I think there's also enormous opportunities for you to partner with third-party providers from the technology community. So, for example, this morning I had arranged a meeting with Anish Chopra, the federal CTO, with a number of executives from PayPal. We're exploring whether, for example, you could use PayPal to pay for government services. This is something, wow, you mean you don't have to build all that functionality yourself? It might already exist? That's part of the promise of becoming, in some sense, a citizen of this new internet platform. It's not just for the private sector, it is for the government sector. You can build applications, you can use applications from outside, and you can build this next generation of government here in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. For those who really want to try to wrap your minds around it, I took the opportunity to read a paper that Tim wrote. I read it last night. It's the beginning of it is called Web Squared, and I think squared is probably better reflective of the speed at which this stuff is happening. This isn't linear growth. This is exponential growth. If you think about how not so far long ago it was, no one had, Twitter didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist, and now even people like the Department of Public Works are up on Twitter and Facebook. So this stuff is happening really fast. Just some things I pulled out of that paper. The scale of participation has increased by orders of magnitude. So, think about our being able to reach not just those same people who come to your commission meeting, but really all the people out there that we're trying to serve. Another one, harnessing people to do tasks that are difficult for computers to perform on their own. I think that's a lot of the basis of we tend to try to build our own systems to do everything. A lot of what the great stuff that's happened out on the internet is by other people taking data and working with it. Another one, recognizing and then teaching the overlooked regularity of what at first appears to be unstructured data. I think a lot of times we look at what we have and it's hard for us to envision how it might be useful to other people, how people might make use of it. And that's what I think this the Data SF is all about. And then here's a very specific one, transparency that allows auditing by anyone who cares, not just by overworked, understaffed regulators. I think that's something we can probably all really relate to, and that some things that maybe we should be catching or seeing from data generated by our own operations, it's hard for us to do. We don't have big staffs of auditors and analysts that we'd like to. You start putting this information out here, people are going to figure out a way to find problems and hopefully find solutions. So I recommend you read this paper. I think Tim is seeing many steps beyond.
Yeah, this one is a little. This is probably a little far along. The original paper I wrote on Web 2.0 is also probably worth reading. If you just Google for what is Web 2.0, that'll give you some context for where we were 5 years ago. The Web Squared is really where we're going with devices in particular, and the way devices are really going to change the way people interact with the internet. But yeah,
some of it's almost scary how Tim sees these devices interacting with us in our lives, but it's well worth reading. So the mayor hasn't been alone here in championing this stuff. Phil Ting, since he came to office, has been kind of driving innovation and management reform and the introduction of technology into what is arguably one of our more important departments, because if he's not doing his job, we don't have a city budget to finance the rest of the government. He's not only tried to bring the technology up to modern levels within the Assessor Recorder's Office since being elected, but he's also recognized the need to partner with the other agencies. As an example, the Department of Public Works, we have an address database that we use for permitting, for inspection, for service requests. The Department of Building Inspection has an address database that they use to issue their building permits and to inspect buildings. And then, of course, the Assessor's Office has, again, what is maybe the most important database, and that's what's the basis for the property taxes that fund the government. Kind of recognizing this, Phil has been leading a collaboration to bring all this together into a master address database project, and he's doing it on an open platform. So the speed at which this process is coming to fruition is much, much faster than would be through the traditional kind of IT procurement process that we've heard about. So Phil is definitely one of the leaders on open source and open data, and want to thank him also for his leadership and have him inspire you with some tales of what he's doing in the Assessor Recorder's Office.
Okay, well, thank you, Ed, and thanks, Tim, for joining us today. I was just going to ask a show of hands. How many of you have been on the website Zillow? So just so you all know, that data, if you live in San Francisco, comes from our office, comes from the city. They don't develop the data by themselves. They compile all the data from all the assessors' offices nationwide to make up that information. So that is an example of open source data that has impacted your life, just because for some reason the last 3-4 years, a lot of us have been concerned with our home prices. And in San Francisco, I'm concerned about all your home prices, frankly. So it's been a very important issue nationwide. We, in our office, have been working very close with Ed and DPW and Vivian and DBI, and just to show you how important it is, for years and years and years, our office needs to go over to DBI to get plans to do our assessments. It's anytime you add a deck, or let's say you build a building, we have to go get the plans. Well, plans are pretty cumbersome, so can you imagine, we would have one clerk go over, and the most plans they could bring back were maybe like 20 or 30 plans. And you see this, 5'1", 120-pound Asian woman pushing and carting plans back and forth between City Hall and DBI. This is strike you as very efficient. And when I got here, that was like a bottleneck, because I only had one person. I had space between City Hall and there, and then on top of it, we couldn't even get all the plans shipped over here to City Hall because we didn't have a place to store them in our office. DBI said, you can have all the plans you want. We'll Xerox it, we'll make it happen. So it wasn't a lack of willingness to work together. It was literally the physical confines of what we were dealing with. And so we had an opportunity to thank DBI for their leadership in digitizing all their plans. And so they've been working very diligently to digitize all their plans, and they're starting from most recent and going backwards. And it's been a huge change in impact, not just for DBI, but for us, and most importantly for all of you. Because the faster we can do our assessments on that, it means more revenue for the city. So just by doing that one piece of digitizing building plans, something that sounds rather bureaucratic and rather boring, it's generating millions of dollars for all of us. And during these tough budget times when people don't want to pay taxes, it's good to be generating money on taxes that people are willing to pay. So I think it's something to think about. We've been partnering for years with this company called CD Data. They use also the data in our office, and they sell it to companies all around the country. And what's been remarkable is they're very smart, because they knew that in the past government was rather insular about the data, wanted to control the data. That was the philosophy before. But by working with different counties, what they do is hey, we'll give you an incentive. We'll give you X percentage of what we sell of your data. So if people want to buy San Francisco data, well, we'll give you a cut of it. That way you're incentivized to work with us, to be our partner, because we know that these are tough times. We know you're looking for ways to make revenue and still control your information or manage your information. So it's a great partnership. And I think these are just some of the examples that I know all of us, we look at our data set as somewhat cumbersome, something in our day that we have to do. We look at it as more risk rather than opportunity. But these are huge opportunities that we have as department heads, as managers of all these information, because somewhere, and I think Tim's right, there's somebody who's interested in that data. Who would have thought, like, bus route data would be interesting? Right? I mean, except for it is to the hundreds of thousands of people who ride buses every single day. It's absolutely important. And, that would have been data that we thought, wow, this is something that's just sort of, just reams and reams of information that would be nice, but maybe wouldn't be imperative to have. I've been working a lot on the foreclosure crisis, and one of my frustration points with our own data in our office is every time a trustee deed gets recorded, which is when the foreclosure actually happens, or when they record a notice of default, which is the beginning of the foreclosure process, because there's not a system to get that information, pull it out really quickly, and put it into a database, and all that should be done electronically. It shouldn't even require a clerk or a clerical function. But because there's no easy way, we haven't been able to do the outreach that we wanted to do on the foreclosure issue, to get people help in time to stop this process. And the reason it's important is, yes, the stories are sad. Yes, from a policy point of view, we may not agree with it. Let me just talk to you about money, which is what we do care about in our budget crisis. Foreclosures cost cities money because it's more public works effort. I know Chief Hayes just left. It's more work for the fire department if a property is vacant. It's more work for the police department if a property is vacant. All of a sudden, it becomes an eyesore. All of a sudden, and then what happens, worse comes worse, then you have blocks where you have homes that are vacant. And then not even that, you're starting to lose money. You're going to lose revenue. Because what's happened with the foreclosure crisis, we've been pretty fortunate in San Francisco, but the foreclosure crisis is driving Vallejo into bankruptcy. It's driving certain cities like Antioch and Pittsburgh and Martinez on the brink. So these are issues that we actually have data, and I'm not saying that we could have stopped what I think was a financial tsunami, but I do think if we had better data, there's at least ways that we could have got our information out faster so people could have gotten help in a much quicker way. And that in turn would have helped us as a city and as a county in terms of our revenue stream. So really, I think you all have made an incredibly strong argument as to what the customer imperative is. I think we have a city imperative into why we should be doing this and how important each of our data sets that we have in our offices, not just to the public, but to us as a city. And so I applaud Ed, I applaud the mayor, DT, and Tim for really their incredible vision in this. And I'm just happy to be part of the team and to push this incredible Government 2.0 initiative off the ground in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll give you one example of government imperative that could be solved this way that hasn't been yet. So one of my responsibilities is to clean the streets. And the most efficient way for us to clean the streets is with mechanical street sweepers, because having somebody go around by hand picking up garbage, you're not going to get the city clean that way. We can't clean the streets if people's cars are in the way of our street sweepers. So one of the things I'm hoping to get from this process is to put out our street cleaning times and days and streets. Put out that raw data and let some smart person figure out how to build that into an iPhone app. And now you're at home and your iPhone rings and tells you you got to move your car because the street sweeper's coming. So you, as the public, maybe avoid a ticket, but we get to do our job of getting the streets clean. So, yeah, we're not. Phil's going to make up for that through better property tax assessments.
It's actually an application like that in Vancouver for garbage schedule. Same thing. It was sort of like people forgetting to take out their trash. It's called van trash.
Right, and I think we have Boston, and there's a few places that have them. So we want one here to any developer out there that's listening. So it's easy enough for the mayor to tell us to go out do this, but we need, people have to do the work to make it happen. And just what the mayor said about Department of Technology, there are actually people within the Department of Technology who know how to do this stuff and who are really leading us in that direction. When I first came to the city and county at 311, it's interesting. This is like a reunion here. Heidi Seek and Blair Adams and Nancy Alfaro and Jay Nath were among the first people in the city that I met. and I don't think it's a coincidence that they're kind of a part of this program. But Jay Nath was really the kind of technology lead on 311. And I know from my experience there, he's a very smart and forward-thinking guy. I also happen to know that he and his wife recently moved from out in the hinterlands of the East Bay somewhere into San Francisco. And not only that, but they come to our cleanups on Saturdays as volunteers to help DPW clean the city. So that speaks a lot to his commitment to San Francisco. And I know from working with him that he's really been the brains behind what we're doing with Data SF. So I want to ask Jay to help put you all at ease that DT is here to help you do this.
Thanks, Ed, for the great intro. My name is Jay Nath, and I'm with the Department of Technology. And as Ed mentioned, it does take effort, commitment to get your data out there, and we'll help you along the way. We partner with Ed's department. We partnered with MTA and DBI and several other departments, but we couldn't reach everyone in that short time frame. So I encourage all of you to reach out to us, but I'll be reaching out to you as well. And I think together we can get a lot of data sets out there that people can do some great innovative stuff that you can't even imagine though it's out there. My hope, I'm kind of a book geek. I hope that we can get the library catalog out there so that people can innovate on top of that. And it's millions of records there, but we can get that data out there, and I think people can do some great things. So we're here to help you guys make that transition. And I also, as being a little bit of a geek, I want to speak about the technology just very briefly. I don't want to bore all of you, but we did Data SF, Recovery SF, the 311 Twitter integration on open source technology, and that did not cost the city a dime. We used open source software, so that was a huge cost saver, and it led to shorter implementation times as well. With 311, we were able to get that live with Twitter in 3 months, with Data SF in 2 months, and Recovery SF in 10 days. And I think that speaks volumes to what you can do by avoiding the procurement process. And by doing that, you can just create things and innovate a lot quicker. Open source technology allows you to also collaborate within your department, with other departments, and I think even more profoundly, with other cities. And we're seeing that with Data SF. People are looking at the code, and we're able to share that with Toronto, with other cities that are asking for that. And that's great. They can bootstrap that, and they can get started so much quicker. Why should they have to waste their funds as well? We're also seeing that with the master address database. This is a challenge and a problem here in San Francisco. It's the same challenge that they face in Oakland, the same challenge that they face in Austin, Texas. It's a universal problem. We should be solving these problems collectively, not individually, and continue to, better make use of taxpayer dollars. And so I think this is a civic imperative that we have, a broader picture. And the master address database that Blair Adams has led with Vivian and Ed and with Phil, I think is a great example where we're building something from the ground up to solve a civic problem that's open source. And any other city can now take that and build upon that, and I think that's a wonderful thing, and I think that's just a start. So I encourage all of you to start looking at that model. And the last thing I'm going to say, and I think the most important thing about open source, is that it allows your staff to innovate. And you can question, how do you do that? Well, right now, government doesn't allow you to fail, really, right? There's a big cost to failure. With open source, there isn't that cost there. People can pick up tools, check it out. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Try something new. And so they can try collaboration tools. They can try documentation tools like wikis. And the only investment that they need to make is their own investment in time and research. So again, I encourage all of you. I know that's kind of a techie thing, but open source is profound. And being grounded here in San Francisco, I think it's an important thing that you folks should consider. We have a long list of open source applications that help solve business problems. We've been looking at this space for 2 years. So if you're looking for something for collaboration, document management, we've got some suggestions for you, so you don't have to start from ground zero. So we'll be talking about that as well in terms of how do you get your data out there, but also, what kind of business problems do you have that can be solved with open source potentially, and bypassing that procurement process that can take months, if not years. And I know Tim has been a great supporter of open source. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, just in general, open source is a movement that was once seen as fringe, but back in the mid-90s, we made the case that actually the internet was built on open source, and in fact it is. If you, how many of you in this room think you use Linux? Okay, how many of you use Google? Right? So it's built on Linux, which is an open source program, and sites like Google and Amazon would not exist without open source, because that was the foundation that allowed for the technical innovation of the internet. And I think it's one of the reasons why government IT has lagged behind is that it hasn't said, okay, well, let's just take all these solved problems and let's build on top of this work that's being traded, out there in the open internet. There's so many simple kinds of problems that are available now. The answers, whether it's a wiki or a content management system or a web server, these are all available for free. And so now we get to spend our IT development money on things that are hard. And so that's kind of. And I think I guess probably the other thing I would just say about open source that's so important is it's a culture of sharing. When somebody develops a really useful piece of software that might also be useful to someone else. So, for example, when Jay says you're building this a master address database and that might be useful to other cities, you say, well, wow, well, what do we get out of that? Well, what you get back is something that they developed that you didn't think of, or that you didn't get a chance at. And it's really been a wonderful phenomenon across the internet where so much innovation has happened because of a spirit of sharing. When people realize that a particular piece of software, it didn't give them any competitive advantage to keep it proprietary, but to give it away to everyone else, all of a sudden there was all this great stuff being shared back and forth. And so then the innovation moves forward faster because the things that are left to work on are the hard problems. So
I'd like to open it up and give folks a chance to ask questions. We have kind of a guru, a leader, and an implementer here. So any level of question, these folks should be able to answer it, or thoughts. And one thing I'll add, I don't know if you want to just mention that the app contest.
Yeah, there's a contest happening on November 7th. It's being sponsored by two nonprofits, and it's in here in San Francisco. And they have a contest around data SF, which is great. The community is kind of working together and seeing, hey, government's opening the doors a little bit. Let's see what we can do with that. So I encourage you to invite your staff to attend an event like that, and I think that's what we need to see more of. There's grassroots happening at the civic level, but we don't see the same kind of participation from people inside the walls of government. So I think that would be great to see more government staff at an event like that. And if you guys want more details, I can share that with you.
Anybody have questions, thoughts, wishes for applications?
I'm John Ram, Planning Department. It strikes me as truly ironic that the government hasn't embraced this more when we're talking an open source system, right? I mean, it seems particularly suited to government in so many ways. We're getting ready with DBI to develop a pretty extensive, what we're calling we're some years behind other cities on this, but we're catching up with a new permit tracking system that will be a much more sophisticated way of tracking how we entitle building development and how and it's built and when it's built and how it's built and the number of units, the size of buildings, all those things that come with that whole system. And it strikes me that it is incredibly well suited to what we're talking about. That system will produce in and of itself a wealth of data that we want to make sure the public has access to. And one of the problems we have now is that the process takes so long that we can't keep track of the project from when it comes in the door to when it leaves the door, from application to actual construction, because projects change dramatically over their life. So one of the things for us that would be interesting to know about is just how to keep track of that. One of the things that we're trying to do, and I think this would frankly help, is to how to keep track of the data over the life of a project, and how a project changes. Because frankly, our data right now is not very good data. Because a developer comes in the door and says they want to build 50 units, but by the time they're done, they're actually building 62. But our data still shows it as 50. And so this happens to us a lot. So we're trying to figure out a way to kind of, in a sense, it's kind of real-time data and, during the life of a development project, which could take, in our case, unfortunately, 3 or 4 years. That's one of the challenges, but I think that's one of the potential advantages I see to this system, which allows us to really keep essentially a real-time data information available to not only the public, but frankly to us. And making it available to the public in a very simple way.
Well, the one thing I'd say is that one of the big changes that you have to start working towards is moving away from a document-centric model. Somebody files a plan, and then they file another document which is an updated version of the plan, and so on, to one where you really are simply updating a database and you're keeping track of the changes, in the database. So, some of that might be thinking about how do you go to sort of an online process where somebody files those updates files those updates online. It might be that there's even an iPhone app because they're only updating 3 fields. Maybe there's a way for them to just submit that update quickly. It really does mean reinventing the whole workflow, if you like, of how you gather data in many cases. The problem of revision control is sort of well understood, certainly by software developers. They do this all the time because, of course, code changes day to day, and they want to, you make a mistake in the code, you've got to roll back to some previous version. So the kind of revision tracking you sometimes see in something like Microsoft Word is sort of much better developed in the world of software development. And I think those same principles can apply to web applications as well, where you can build web applications that allow rollback.
Well, I think we've been struggling with the same thing, John, because we're in similar boats where we have all this data, and as you were saying that, it'd be great, and we should probably have a separate conversation about this. It'd be great if we could get the user or the taxpayer to update that information. And I think they would love it because that would be one less trip for them to come into your office, and we would love it because it means that we don't have to type it in.
That's
and
right.
Get paper.
And, exactly. That whole way of changing the mindset of how you can actually turn something like this into a benefit for the the taxpayer or whoever. They're updating the data because they get some benefit out of it. Yeah.
I was just thinking, we get reams of title. For all of you who bought a home, you filled out a stack of paper like this. So you all know how much. It'd be great if you had no paper and you just typed into a database. Yeah. Because for us, we get, every day reams and reams of paper that we got to scan, process. Right. And then we have to find some way to code. So. Yeah.
And your whole issue about plans.
That's right.
There isn't any reason why we I think we'll be very soon to the point where we can require our plan submittals to be electronic. I mean, I know DBI does that with some types of permits now, and there's no reason why, because the vast majority of plans are produced electronically now anyway.
Yeah. I just want to end on just reminding folks that as we try to look to share data, you have assistance, and we're going to be reaching out to you. So I encourage you to start thinking about the data sets that you may want to share. And again, nothing private, nothing confidential, but data that you want the public to see, and you're going to be surprised at what people are going to create. So again, start thinking about that, and we'll start reaching out to you guys.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
These guys know what they're doing, and they can guide you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you, too.
Good job.